Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Okay. So what do we say that the Jews have now the permission to fight back? And when the non-Jews received this message that the king signed a letter saying that Jews could fight back, so a lot of them understood that there was something wrong with this first letter that said that they could kill their enemies. That said that the enemies could kill them. I'm sorry. So it says the Jews smote, the Jews smote their enemies with the destruction, and they did whatever they wanted to with their enemies. It says the Malbim. What's going on here? They smote their their enemies, their oiveim, and then there's the people who hated them. And they could do with the people who hated them with whatever they wanted to. So here it says that they killed and destroyed their enemies. Oiveim means their enemies. And with the ones who hated them, they just did what they wanted. What did they want? What does this mean? So the Malbim explains. It says, what is the difference between oiveim, their enemies, and those who hate them? So we're going to see there's going to be a bigger explanation later on. It was the permission had not been given to the Jews just to kill anyone they wanted to. They wouldn't write. It was only written in the book, written in this letter, that they could take revenge from their enemies, not just anybody they wanted to. They couldn't, take revenge. The next door neighbor drove over their lawn or something. Let's kill him. The Jews didn't have permission to do whatever they wanted. Only those people who were actually threatening them. And since now, we said before that as soon as the second letter came, no one was able to stand against the Jews in the big cities. Why? Because it says that in the big cities, the big cities, that the officials there was more organized. When the officials received these letters, the non-Jewish officials, when they received the letters that the king said the Jews could fight back, so they understood that that's what the king wanted. So they started protecting the Jews. They had nothing particularly against the Jews. And therefore, from then on, the Jews in these cities were only killing those people who were their enemies. That they, like for instance, Amalek, that they wanted to kill the Jews, even though that there was a letter clearly from the king saying the Jews could protect themselves. These were the enemies of the Jews, but the people who just hated the Jews, right? Those people that hated the Jews, the Jews had permission to yell at them and tell them, look, you see what's happening to you, what you wanted to do to us is being done to you. But they didn't have permission to kill them. Says that's the difference between an enemy and someone who hates you. An enemy, his hatred is greater. He wants to actually take it out physically. And someone who hates you, he just hates you. It could be that he just hates you in his heart, or write a letter, or write something in the newspaper or something against it. In Shoshana Biran, the big city, the Jews killed and destroyed 500 people. Now, you're going to see the Malbim is going to say, what's going on over here? I mean, the king sent a letter saying that he didn't want people to kill the Jews. The Jews could kill their enemies. Well, how did they get 500? How could they kill 500 people? They were only allowed to kill people who actually stood up against them and tried to kill them. So he's going to explain this. Okay, and also they killed. One second. This is a good part. They killed also the 10. Shoshana, they killed 500 people. What happened? Chamesh Mos Ish. And in addition, among those 500 people, or maybe in addition to them, they killed also the 10 sons of Haman. And later on, they're going to get, Esther is going to get permission to have them hung up so that everybody will be afraid. Because you have to remember, the Jews are outnumbered like 500 to 1. So who are the 10 sons of Haman? Parshandata, Dalphon, Asfata. That's 3. You counting? 3. Porata,
4,
Adalia,
5,
Paridata, that's 6, Parmashta,
7,
Arisai,
8,
Aridai,
9,
Piazata.
10,
That's all the 10. And it says, Aseret, Bene Haman. This, we try to read all of these 10 sons in one breath. So it ends up he's saying, Aridat of Aseret, the 10 sons of Haman, Ben Amadata, the enemy of the Jews. They killed Biza, but in the spoils, Lo Shalchuot Yadam, the Jews did not take any spoils of war. Rashi now explains, who are these 10 sons of Haman? Re'iti, I saw the Seder Olam. It's a midrash which is called Seder Olam. Elu Asara, these 10, Shekatvu Sitna al Yehudim, al Yehuda Yerushalayim. They wrote letters against Judah, Yehuda, the area of Israel called Yehuda and Yerushalayim. Remember what we said, that the kingdom of Israel split way back in before as soon as immediately after King Solomon died. King Solomon built the first temple, and immediately after he died, the kingdom of Israel split. The bottom part where Jerusalem was Yehuda and Yerushalayim. Now, when the Jews went into exile, the first temple was destroyed, so they came back. The king Koresh allowed the Jews to come back and rebuild the temple. But there were Jews and also non-Jews that tried to stop them. The Jews were what they called the Samaritans, and actually those were the non-Jews. I guess they sort of considered Jews, and the Sadducees, the Tzaddukim, but especially this was the Shomranim. I'm sorry, the Tzaddukim came later. I take that back. There came the Shomranim, what do they call the Shomranim? What do they say? The Samaritans. Oh, and they tried to influence the king of Persia to stop the building of the temple. The Jews were building, so they wrote letters regarding Yehuda of Yerushalayim. Yerushalayim is part of Yehuda. Kamosh Katuv, like it's written in the book of Ezra. Achashverosh, at that time, who was the king? Achashverosh, he was the one that was in charge. He was ruling the whole world. He took over from Koresh. I think there was one king in the middle of. In the beginning of his kingship, he wrote Sitna al Yoshve Yerushalayim, and Achash, in the time of Achashverosh, they wrote letters against the Yehuda and Yerushalayim, the Jews in this area of Israel and Yerushalayim, that they shouldn't rebuild the temple. What was it? The batal oli minagola. They said, don't let any more Jews come up from Iraq, whenever it was from Babylon, in the days of Koresh. Koresh conquered the whole world. Right? He conquered Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar was Babylon, and Koresh, he was Persia. And he conquered the whole world. Even though they began to build the holy temple, and they sent slander on them. Hakutim, the Kutim, that was the Kutim were the Samaritans, the Shomonim. And they stopped them from building the temple. And when King Koresh died, then who eventually took over Achashverosh. And Achashverosh, he elevated Haman, and Haman took trouble, Shalo Yasku Tam Yerushalayim, that they would not continue to settle and to build in Jerusalem in the building. What did they do? They sent, in the name of Achashverosh, to all the ministers of all the places where Jews lived to tell them, don't let the Jews go. And these were the 10 sons. These were the emissaries that were sent to all these different places to tell the Jews, to try to stop the Jews from coming back to Israel and build the temple. So even though they killed the 10 sons of Haman, and Haman was fantastically rich, and obviously he gave a lot of it to his sons, but the Jews did not take any of the money from these sons. Why? So that the king won't get aggravated. They're taking money, they're taking my money. They gave all the money to the king. So we don't want anything to, all we want to do is save our lives. On that day, there came the number of killed in Shushan Abira in front of the king. Right? How many did we say got killed? 500. So why do you have to tell the king how many people got killed? It says this is very important. It says Bayomahu on that day. It says because the Jews did not have any permission to kill anyone except for their enemies, that had revealed desires to destroy the Jews, like we said. So therefore, Lafia Rova Arogin, 500 to kill 500, it's a lot of people to kill. Shahorgu Noda Kirabut Soram. They were all of a sudden he knew that, listen, he had sent out a letter, and for sure the people in Shushan, that was the big city, they got this letter saying that the Jews were allowed to protect themselves. Everyone understood that the king didn't want the Jews to get killed, right? They didn't want to get killed. Nevertheless, there were 500 men, and that was only the ones that got killed. Nevertheless, there were people that were standing on them to kill them. Therefore, they immediately brought the number to show how many people that really want to kill the Jews, even after the king already sent out this order. Nevertheless, there's still at least 500 people that Hirimu Rosh, that they took up arms and tried to kill the Jews. Now, interestingly enough, in all these battles, not one Jew gets killed. So the king says, well, I guess the situation is more serious than I thought. I guess that Haman is not the only enemy of the Jews, because the Jews can only kill people they can only defend themselves. They can only kill people who are trying to kill them. So the king said to Esther, the queen, okay, B'Shushan Abira, the Jews killed 500 people. And they killed 10 sons of Haman. So 510. In the other countries of the king, what was done? What's your question? Whatever you want, what's your request? Just tell me what you want and I'll give it to you. I'll give it to you. Let's just look again at Malbim. From this, when Achashverosh saw how many enemies there were for the Jews, that he realized there was something to save them. He didn't know the situation was so bad. Now this is a big miracle, you have to understand, because just a few days earlier, well, actually now it's not, this is a year earlier. A year earlier, he put out a declaration that Haman could kill all the Jews. And Haman said, I'll give you, a lot of money to kill. And the king said, I don't want any money. You just do whatever you want. You can kill the Jews. All of a sudden, the king is interested in saving the Jews, and he's genuinely interested. First of all, he saw that Mordechai saved his life. Second, he realizes that Esther she's Jewish and she's his wife. And third of all, he realizes that suddenly it comes to his mind, why does he want to kill the Jews? What exactly did the Jews do wrong? To everybody. Here we see they're killing all these enemies. They're not taking their money. They're not. And so what exactly have they got against the Jews? He can't really figure it out. Nevertheless, he understands that the Jews are not anything bad and that he's got to protect them. And he said, even in Shushan, that's what he said to Esther. If in Shushan Bira, which this is the main city, and everybody, and this is where I live, and everybody knows that I don't want the Jews to get killed. If in my big city, where they know that I'm the protectorate of the Jews, there's so many people that hate the Jews, that the 500 people got killed. If so, who knows what's going on in the other countries, and the other countries, and the other where the Jews are. Who knows how many people there are there? Certainly, there must be even more, because they're far away from the king. Okay, so what do you want to do? What do you suggest, Esther, that I can do in order to save them? So Esther says like this: Tomer Esther, listen, if the king, Iman Lamelech Tov, then also let the Jews kill tomorrow, because he just gave permission on the 13th the Jews could protect themselves. Let the Jews tomorrow also that are in Shushan, that they can do according to that day. In other words, on the 14th also, and these 10 sons of Haman that we killed, hang them up on a tree. Right? The same ones that were killed, hang up on a tree. And he explains why, that he wants everyone to be afraid. The more people that are afraid of the Jews, the less people are going to attack the Jews. And also, he claims, Malbim claims that there's two places. There's Shushan and the Shushan Abira. Shushan Abira was the capital city where the king was. And then there was the city of Shushan, that was like the periphery of the city. That's where all the big ministers and everything lives. Okay, anyway. So he said, okay, you know what? Today, on the 13th, I gave you permission to protect yourself. I'll give also on the 14th. 14th. Give us permission also on the 14th day to kill all the enemies that are there and to hang up the 10 sons, so that maybe this will discourage the enemies of the Jews. And the king said to do so. But so he put a law in Shushan, and the 10 sons of Haman he hung up, because there that it should be a decree from the king himself to allow the Jews to fight the next day also. The Jews gathered that were in Shushan also on the 14th of the day, and they killed 300 more people. And in the spoils, they didn't take any spoils. So in Shushan they kill 500. What about the rest of the Jews? Shari Yehudim Asher b'Medinot HaMelech, they gathered up. They gathered up to protect themselves, and they were relieved from the enemies, and they killed the people who hated them. 75,000 people. We're talking about 120 countries, but no one took any spoils of war. Yeah. Okay, let's just do this last Malbim over here so we can understand what he says. He said that there's three types of cities. This sentence, I'm sorry. He's talking about the cities that were surrounded with walls. There's cities that were surrounded with walls, that there were the big ministers and everything. And that's what I talked about before. And there, the big ministers and the big important people, they had their own little private armies and the bodyguards, and they protected the Jews. So there it says, Ish lo amad bifnehem. No enemy could even stand up and take arms against the Jews. They didn't have to make any war. But here it's talking about what about the cities that were open? The rural cities and other cities where there were no big ministers or important people. And these open cities, a lot of them were small, a lot of them were just villages and towns. There weren't anyone to protect the Jews. So that's what it says, that the other countries, they had to really stand and protect themselves. And then the Jews had to really do some serious self-defense, and they made a war against their enemies, those people and they won. Therefore, it says that they killed not just their enemies that wanted to kill them, also Soneim, also the people who were their secret enemies. We said before, a Sone, a person who hates, he keeps it to himself. Well, here the Jews had permission also, because the Jews were allowed to kill them also, because that was Zerah Amalek. It says that God hardened the heart of Paro. Remember the king of Egypt? He hardened his heart. Why did he harden his heart? Because he didn't want Paro to get smart and play tricks and say, okay, Jews, get out of here, and still retain his same evil hatred to the Jews. He'll just wait for the right time to get them. He wanted to destroy them completely. Well, here's the same thing. These people that were the seed of Amalek, so there were some people that were Oyivim, they were open enemies, but then when they saw that they were losing, so they could be just Sonim. They hated the Jews, they just kept it to themselves. Nevertheless, those people were from the seed of Amalek. They had permission to kill them also. In other words, actual murderers of the Jews and even potential murderers of the Jews. That was in the open cities. So on the 13th day of the month of Adar, that's the open cities. They fought. And on the 14th day, they rested. And they made it into a happy day. Now, that's how the holiday of Purim, and actually also Chanukah also, they didn't make a holiday on the day they won. They made the holiday the day that they rested from the war, the day after the war, because they had to do it on their own. And the other holidays like Passover, because God did it all. So the Jews made them, that we make a holiday on the day that we left Egypt. On that day we left Egypt, because we didn't have to do it. God did the whole thing. Same thing giving the Torah. We make a holiday the day we received the Torah, which is the Yom Kippur, the day the holy priest went into the temple. That very day. But on Chanukah and Purim, we make the holiday the day after the miracle. And the reason is because we had to make the miracle. We had to do the battle. We had to fight. So the day when we rested, that was the day that was the miracle for us. So the walled-in cities, they fought the battle on the 14th day of Adar, and the day they rest is the 15th. And the regular cities, they fought their battle on the 13th, and their Purim is the day before. So that's what it is in Israel. In Israel, that's what's called Shushan Purim, and that the in Jerusalem, which was a walled city, and it was supposed to be walled from the days of Joshua. It says. Some people say it didn't have to be just the days of Joshua. It has to be walled just from the ancient times. Nobody knows what. And the reason they mentioned Joshua is to remember the miracle of the land of Israel, because this whole miracle didn't happen in Israel, right? This whole miracle, not like Hanukkah. The miracle of Hanukkah happened in Israel. This happened over in Shushan. Most of the Jews weren't in Israel at the time. The Jews that were in the city of Shushan, they gathered on the 13th and the 14th, and they fought their battles, but they rested on the 15th, and they made that day into the happy holiday for that Shushan Purim. This was called Shushan Purim, the day after 15th. Al kein haYehudim aprozim hayoshveim be'erei aprozos hayosim es Yom Arba Asor LaChodesh Adar Simcha Mishteh VeYom Tov uMishloach Manois Ish L'Re'ehu. These are the commandments of the day. There's 4 mems. Mem, Mishteh. You have to make a meal on Purim in the daytime. That's the main thing. You have to make Mishloach Manot. Mishloach Manot. You have to send gifts to your friends. Right? At least one gift of 2 types of food to one friend. At least bare minimum. Nobody does minimum. Everybody does more. And matanot le'avyonim. Also giving gifts to the poor. Charity to the poor. You have to give to at least 2 people. And mishteh. You have to, it says you're supposed to get drunk on that day. Simcha, mishteh. Simcha, you have to be happy. Anyway, Mishloach Manot L'Yisrael, you have to be. Rashi says these are the cities that don't have any walls around them. The cities that do have walls around them, they make the holiday on the 15th. It says that there's supposed to be walled cities that are walled from the time of Yehoshua ben Nun. Yehoshua ben Nun is the one who brought the Jews into Israel, right? That's what the rabbis say. So there's 4 things you're supposed to do, 4 commandments the Jewish people do on Purim, and actually the 4 of them are not mentioned, but it's going to be mentioned here. The 4 of them start with the mems. Let's start it over again. There is mishteh. You have to make a meal in the daytime. Mishloach manot. You have to send gifts to your friends, at least to one friend. 2 things to one friend, at least. Matanot le'avyonim, mem. Matanot le'avyonim. And Magila, and hearing the Magila. The Magila is done in the nighttime and the daytime. You have to do the Magila twice. The nighttime and the daytime. But the meal and the sending of the gifts, etc., and the gifts to the poor, that's all done in a day. Mordechai wrote all these things. V'yishlach Seforim, and he wrote books. This is where Mordechai was the one who wrote Magilat Esther, right? To all of the Jews that were in all the countries of the king Achashverosh, that were nearby and that were far away, the whole world, right? This is the Megillah as it is. This is the Megillah that we have right here. Mordechai wrote it. Did Mordechai write these words also? Right? It seems that he did. What? Lekayem aleim, to fulfill, that they should do and make this day the 14th of the month of Adar and the 15th day of the month of Adar every single year should be a holiday. Now, see, how did it happen? There was a big miracle, but they were afraid that maybe it would get forgotten like everything else. So they wrote it down, and he got the okay of the rabbis at that time. There was the Anshe Knesset Gadola. There was the men of the Great Assembly. So they gave their okay. Kayamim asher nachu bohem hayudim oivehem v'chodesh asher napach lahem yogon. Like the days that the Jews were relieved of their enemies, and the month that was transformed from misery to joy, from mourning, M-O-U-R, from mourning to a holiday. And they should be days of feasting and joy, mishloach manot, and sending gifts, each person to his friend, and matanot li'avinim, and also giving gifts to the poor. The Kibul Yehudim, and all the Jews accepted what they began to do, and what Mordechai decreed on them. What do you mean they began to do? What happened over here? It says the Jews began what they began to do, namely the scattered cities, they accepted the 14th, and the walled cities the 15th, what they began to do. And what Mordechai wrote to them, that the walled-in cities should do on the 15th. There's, of course, a midrash that's very well known in Chabad especially, and it says that the Jews accepted what they began to do. What did they begin to do? So it says the Jews accepted on Purim what they began to do when they received the Torah. When, by the way, did the Jews receive the Torah? You know, when did the Jews receive the Torah? So we have the holiday of Shavuot, which is when the Jews received the Torah. But the fact is they didn't really receive the Torah back then. Why? Because Moses broke the Torah. They received the 10 commandments on the holiday of Shavuot. That's what we celebrate, the 10 commandments. That's a receive. And Moses went up for 40 days to receive the Torah and to bring down all the laws and all the explanations and everything. And he came down with the tablets and all the explanation. The Jewish people were worshiping the golden calf, which that's what we learned about 2 weeks ago in the Torah, Parshas Kitisa. And Moses broke the tablets. And he went up a second time, another 40 days. And God gave him forgiveness. And then he went up a third time and he got the second tablets. And he came down with the second. When did he come down with the second tablets? Well, if you count 120 days, in other words, 3 months from the first tablets, of the first time when he went up, so he went up, what was it, on the sixth day of Sivan. So if you count 120 days, which comes to be 4 months, right? Each time he went up for 40 days. So if you count that, it comes out Yom Kippur. It comes out that he came down with the second tablets on Yom Kippur. So it says that this holiday is Yom Kippur, is just like Purim. Yom Kippurim, the holiday of Yom Kippurim, Yom Kippurim it's called. It is just like Purim. It's not as high as Purim. Why? Because when the Jewish people received the Torah back then, and Yom Kippur right? So they received the Torah, but they didn't actually have self-sacrifice for it. They still had this little sort of, tendencies to make trouble for God, and they did make trouble for God. They refused to go into the land of Israel. They were complaining, even after they received the Torah. They were complaining about the manna wasn't good, it wasn't enough, and everything all the time. They were making trouble for Moses constantly. And so they didn't really receive the Torah. The first time they really received the Torah, others to be willing to have self-sacrifice, to lose everything for the sake of the Torah, just to do what God wants, is the first time was important. So that's what it says. The Jews finally accepted, the Kibul Yudim, the Jews finally accepted what they began to do at Mount Sinai, this idea of self-sacrifice. They didn't really get the point of it for almost 1,000 years, right? The holiday of Purim happened 1,000 years after they received the Torah, after the Jews received the Torah. So 1,000 years went by, and the Jews didn't really get the point, namely of total sacrifice for the truth. They didn't really get this until the holiday of Purim. That's why it's such a happy holiday. Because Haman ben Hammedatha Agagi, the enemy of the Jews, thought about the Jews to destroy them. And Vehipil Pur, so he threw these things called purs. What is pur? Corral, lots. He threw a lottery. And this is very interesting. We talked about this before, that the holiday is called Purim. We'll see in the end. The holiday is called Purim because of these purs. And pur is not a Hebrew word. It's not a Jewish word. It's a Persian word, pur. So this is the only holiday in Judaism which does not have a Jewish name, doesn't have a name from the Torah. It says clearly, a pur, it even has to translate it because it's not a Jewish word, it's not a Hebrew word. He threw purs. What is a pur? It has to tell us. It's a goral. It's a lot, whatever it is that he threw, some sort of lots. In order to destroy the Jews. That's what he thought, to destroy the Jews. That's what it says. But when he came in front of the king, he came with a letter, and it is with his letter to destroy all the Jews. This is when Esther, he came to destroy the Jews, but Esther, but when Esther, Rashi explains, when Esther came in front of the king, then she got a letter. The king says, okay, said, all right, I will write books and I will rescind, I will turn back the decree of Haman. Therefore, Al-Kain Kar-O. Therefore, we will call Liyamim Ha'Purim Hashem Apur. These days are called Purim because of the pur. Now, it's also another interesting thing that what is this pur? What is this pur? These lots. The lots were the instrument that Haman used to try to destroy the Jews. And it ended up that was really very successful. He really should have. It said it came out on a month that was lucky. That was in the mazel. What is it? The zodiac was exactly right for Haman. Everything was going his way. And somehow or other, all of a sudden, everything turned around. But the pur was the instrument to destroy all the Jews. That was the instrument. How could you call a holiday on the instrument that was used to kill the Jews? Why not call the holiday instead of Purim, call it like Mordechai's Day, or Esther's Day, or Happy Day, or Transformation Day, or something like that? Why Pur holiday? It's like saying, the gas chamber day or something. The Pur was the worst possible thing. That's what he used in order to destroy the Jews. So it says, because the reason is, it explains in Chassidus, and I'll just give a short explanation, that Haman was a very spiritual person. And Haman realized that you can destroy the Jews in a conventional way. You have to do something that is going to appeal to the spiritual powers. And he realized the Jews also ruled over the spiritual powers as well. They defeated they got out of Egypt. So he realized he had to go something that was even above the spiritual. He had to go according to just pure, I want to call it blind luck. That was the only way that he would have a chance against the Jews, because the Jews have shown their superiority in every other way. Defeating Egypt, nobody could do that. So he realized something very, very deep. Haman. He realized, listen, one second, God doesn't like evil, right? But on the other hand, he realized God is creating everything. Haman realized God is creating me. He's creating Haman. Haman realized that I am being created by some aspect of God, which obviously tolerates and not only that sustains evil. And up to now, I'm succeeding. Haman got thrown up to be the big, the big minister of the whole world. He was So he somehow or other appealed to this power which was creating him, this aspect of God that was creating him. And this is an aspect which is above right or wrong, good or bad, from which bad and good comes. That's what we said in the morning, where it says it's a thing in the Purim to get so drunk you don't know the difference between that Haman is the bad guy and Mordechai is the good guy. Well, in other words, from the essence of God, is really everything the same? Is it really all equal? There's no bad, there's no good. Haman said, seems that's what it is. Here I am, I'm the head, and the Jewish people are, they're gonna be the bottom. Let's see if it works. And it worked. He threw these pores. But the problem is the whole thing, God wanted to show that even in this area, this aspect, this also from this aspect of godliness that bears evil, it's also willing to overlook the evil of the Jews. And not only that, the Jewish people, they're willing to die and leave all of their, their values, their weird, twisted value system that said that they should do anything in order to stay alive, even to bow down to Haman, to go to the meal of Achashverosh, anything just to, for me. So what happened? The Jews, suddenly they left. The Jews all left all of their normal considerations, their whole nature. And so Haman left, so to speak, his nature. He went above good and bad. The Jewish people also went above good and bad. All of a sudden, they went against nature, and nature, a person wants to live. When that happened, then the whole business was thrown above the world, so to speak, above spiritual. Oh, now who's going to be the boss? Now, what does God say now? Right? Is God going to say, oh, everybody's equal, just however it comes out, let's just flip a coin? No. Even at that level, where there is no difference between good, bad, up there, God loves the Jews also. So that's why the whole holiday is called on the poor. The poor was a thing of luck, which was above spiritual nature. And even there, God chooses the Jews. But it has to be that the Jews throw themselves up to that level, that they're willing to sacrifice everything they've got. With this, when you read this, you're supposed to hold up together. What happened to them? And this is where we're going to stop today. God willing, tomorrow we're going to continue and finish the Magila of Esther. There's not that much left to go, but it's really interesting things from now on. Have a good day with Mashiach. Now, hope to see you all tomorrow, 8:15 in the morning. Shalom. Shalom, shalom.